Very good afternoon to all. The Operations and Supply Chain and the Information Management Committee of SPJIMR warmly welcome each one of you to the second edition of our annual flagship business conclave, OPtIMize. OPtIMize, which has started last year, focuses on stressing and bringing out the importance of technology as an enabler in operations and supply chain. We warmly welcome our esteemed guests, our committee heads, our area faculties, and the audience. I, Alice Jain,
and I, Agrima Gurnani,
would be your host for the day. We hope that you would have an enlightening experience today.
The digital world is in a constant state of flux, and to move with the ever-changing landscape around us, leveraging data can help to make more informed and powerful data-driven business decisions. The importance of data in decision lies in consistency and continual growth. It enables companies to create new business opportunities, generate more revenues, predict future trends, optimize current operational efforts, and produce actionable insights. Big supply chain analytics uses data and quantitative methods to improve decision-making for all activities across the supply chain. Keeping this in mind, the theme for the conclave this year is data-driven decision-making in supply chain management.
For the commencement of OPtIMize, we have a video message from the Dean of the Institute, Dr. Ranjan Banerjee. I would request Abhishek to play the video, please.
Sure.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and let me first welcome our chief guest, Mayur. Mayur is an old friend, and we do have some common contacts as well as some interactions in the context of Pidilite. There are many other supporters of the Institute in terms of our panelists, and my old friend Murugan, I think, will be working on a workshop later today. And let me welcome all of you, students from within the Institute, as well as our visitors who are here today, faculty members. I think OPtIMize is a conclave which is rapidly gathering some stature of its own as a forum where supply chain experts, students, practitioners come together to discuss issues of importance and relevance. And this is a good time to talk about this subject. We are talking about data-driven supply chains. Digital disruption is something that we were all talking about 2 years back, till the world decided that this needed to be accelerated and digital disruption happened to us. I mean, I can speak of our own institute that if I had gone to my faculty body and said that we need to start teaching online in a month, I would have got at least 10 good reasons why all of us could not start teaching online in a month. Now, how long do you think it took our institute to move to online teaching? So the right answer in this case is 4 days. We sent our students home and due for safety reasons, and 3 days later, 2 faculty members made a presentation on Zoom and did a demo. And 1 day later, some intrepid faculty, including myself, volunteered to be the first guinea pigs to teach online. And then subsequently, we were up and running. Within a month, we learned, and I think we've now been doing it with fairly good results for over 7 to 8 months. And we are, of course, now at a point where we are slowly looking forward to coming back to the physical environment. But there are things that we have learned from the remote environment, which are dramatic and useful. Now, what are the learnings for supply chains and data-driven supply chains from the pandemic? I think there are 2 things I'd like to talk about. One is that typically we design for what is called efficiency, which essentially means broadly that if you had to make cars at 5 factories and you had 5 different types of cars and you had demand, it often makes sense to specialize, which means that you make one car in one factory, you have economies of scale, and then you figure out your distribution efficiencies and supply chain efficiencies. But today, I think that question itself is that supposing you have 5 locations and one of those locations is shut off, how will you still continue operations? And what that might imply is that you might say, hey, every vehicle might need to be made at 2 locations. Distribution might give me a plan A and a plan B. So design for resilience is fundamentally different from design for efficiency. And how do you design systems for resilience, I think, is one thing. The second is a lesser known fact, but I think in 2015, Bill Gates had made a TED talk. And in that TED talk, he had predicted that a pandemic very much like the one we are coming across would happen. Of course, nobody listened to Mr. Gates at that point in time. Now, what is the point I'm making? You cannot expect that the next disruptive threat will be a pandemic. The next disruptive threat will be something else that you have not thought of. And as an example, what would happen today to all of us if the internet were to crash? And that is a thought that we cannot even begin to conceive. So what am I saying? I think along with resilience and design for resilience, which is very much something that we have learned from the pandemic, it is useful to look at scenario planning and say what are the likely or possible alternative disruptive scenarios in the next 5 years. There is not only health, there is climate change. I mean, there is a lot of talk about Mumbai being submerged at some point in time. There's talk about the rising tides, and you are seeing multiple signals. So my point is that what is the role of a data-driven supply chain there? That essentially, if you have 4 scenarios, each of these scenarios have alternative predictors or early warning signals. And if we are able to tune into environmental indicators and we are able to design a resilience plan for alternative disruption, then we can trigger our response to those disruptions a little bit faster. If an organization had a pandemic response that was 3 months ahead of other organizations, what do you think would be the market share impact for that organization? So scenario building, data tracking, early warning signals, design for resilience, and the last element of data-driven supply chains, which is to say, if you could have the right information where you wanted it, when you wanted it, but it comes at a cost, where would you want it? Where would you want it? What is the information that you would want, which would significantly enhance decision making? So that we need to think about. So it's not just about technology. It's at the interface between technology and decision making that value happens. And I'm hoping that today's conclave will help us to understand how exactly that value can be created. I look forward to the deliberation, and I'm sure you will have a very valuable day. My apologies that I could not be here with you live for the entire session, but I'm sure it will be a great day. Thank you very much.
I thank Dr. Ranjan for his encouraging words. And with this, we mark the beginning of the conclave. We have a ton of events lined up for you today. We have a fun quiz lined up at 5 p.m. on Dare to Compete platform with exciting prizes for the winners. The quiz is followed by a workshop at 6 p.m. by Mr. Murugan, who is the Capability Harmonization and Innovation Director, Global Planning Excellence at Johnson & Johnson.
And now, without further ado, let's begin the conclave by welcoming our keynote speaker for the day, Mr. Mayur Danait. Mr. Mayur is currently Chief Information Officer at Pidilite Industries and has over 25 years of experience across the consulting, IT, pharmaceuticals, and consumer goods domains. His key role at Pidilite is to align the organization's IT strategy to its business goals and to leverage technology to deliver superior business results. With Pidilite since 2019, Mr. Mayur is driving an IT strategy and digital roadmap with a focus which includes SAP HANA implementation and globalization, customer experience, business optimization, and newer digital revenue models to drive growth. His previous assignment with the global pharma major Lupin, whereas global CIO, he initiated and program managed various global initiatives in the ERP analytics, IT infrastructure, and IT security domains. Under his leadership, Lupin was a pioneer in the adoption of cloud and productivity technologies. Prior to this, Mr. Mayur had several years of cross-industry experience and across a spectrum of organizations, including Eastman Kodak, SAP, and Asian Paints. He's a regular speaker at IT industry events and serves on the advisory boards of leading technology organizations. He holds an MBA in operations from the Indian Institute of Management, Lucknow, and a BTech in mechanical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. We are honored to have you as our chief guest, sir. This is to inform the attendees that the chat will be open for Q&A post Mr. Mayur's presentation, so please note down your questions. And I now hand over the stage to Mr. Mayur.
Thank you, Agrima, and thank you to the organizers of this event for having me over. I was just chatting before you started the webinar, and I was telling Professor Ashitosh that since there are so many learned academicians here, I will completely steer clear in talking about anything which is intellectual in nature, and I will stick to my role as a practitioner of technology. Give me a minute to share my screen. I would like to make a few points as part of this keynote, and hopefully the attendees find this interesting. This is a particularly vast subject, and I thought I should, from the standpoint of doing justice to 15 minutes and making whatever points could be useful in the context of this conversation, I thought I would narrow down that entire gamut of technology, data analytics, etc., to a couple of points and talk through a couple of cases that hopefully spark some imagination within the attendees in terms of how new data or new technologies can transform supply chain going forward. What will be the importance of data, and what are the kind of skill sets, most importantly, that will become more and more important in coming times. So let me just move forward. So this is a little bit about myself. I think this has been adequately, I've been more than adequately introduced, so I will not spend any time on this. The only point I will make here is that I started my career in '96, and from a technology standpoint, and I have a specialization in operations, supply chain, and then spent a lot of years as a practitioner, as a consultant, and then practitioner of technology. And during my career of 25 years, I've seen a few waves coming in. When I started my career, it was the age of home-built, legacy, custom-built applications, which were built on systems like FOxPro, Sybase, Power Builder, etc. So we used to write code, design interfaces, essentially build software ground up. And then the ERP wave happened, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the early implementations of SAP that happened in the country. And I could see the power of integration, the power of data, and the transparency that it got within organizations. And then the advanced supply planning, collaborative planning kind of era happened, where solutions like I2 and SAP APO and the CM systems happened, the SRM systems happened, and really that widened the gamut of availability of data and so on and so forth. And now I think we are seeing the third wave, the third distinct wave that I'm seeing is the wave towards digital. The wave where data will get more important than anything else. And that was really the context of this conversation. I wanted to talk about these 5 broad areas with the group, and then spend a little bit of time on each of them and come back and summarize. So that was the idea of the 15 minutes that I have. One of the biggest trends that we are seeing now is the movement from consumer internet to industrial internet, or industrial IoT as they call it. We are moving from a supply chain that had very disparate small amounts of data coming in from different pockets into big data that today's supply chains now generate. We are moving towards a necessity of a supply chain in the past era that had to just respond. And now we are expecting a supply chain to both predict and respond real time, respond much faster than a supply chain would respond in the good old days. Cloud used to be a reluctant thing to do for most enterprises. It's pretty much become a must to have. It's pretty much become a competitive advantage today. And then of course talent. A lot of us when we were growing up viewed mathematics with a little bit of suspicion. We always felt it was for geeks. And today suddenly mathematics and a blend of data sciences, statistics, the ability to understand and get insights from data is becoming a necessary and super competitive business skill of the future. So let me start with these points and try to make my point on why I believe in in what I just spoke about. This is something that we have all been familiar with. We have studied this at some point of time. Over the last 250 years or so, we have moved the needle from what was predominantly human effort based or animal effort based manufacturing towards now, which is the other extreme of cyber physical systems, connected systems, billions of sensors around us, etc., etc. It's not been an easy journey. It's taken a lot of effort. It's cost a lot of jobs. It's cost a lot of revolution. But steadily, if you look at, and it's happened over 250 years, but there have been distinct markers in when this has happened. Every phase has lasted for 100 years before the next wave came in and took over. But each of these 4 phases has been marked by the use, marked by something. The first one was marked by the use of steam, coal, etc. to drive mechanization. The second was marked by the use of electrical energy. The third was largely electronics, chips, and PLCs, etc., where data could be digitally captured and then moved into ERP systems for analysis, etc., etc. Now we are talking of internet-based connectivity, and that's the industry 4.0 that's being spoken about. Essentially, IoT is something that is driving that shift. That is really what is creating the big data that is being spoken about. Most people look at IoT as a product. Essentially, it's not a product. It's a set of markets. It's a set of verticals. The last statement there at the bottom, which says that there are 20 billion devices connected to the internet today. That's actually a Gartner prediction from about 3 or 4 years ago. So they predicted in 2020 there would be 20 billion devices. I don't know the count now. I don't know if it's possible to know the count now. But if you look at the number of, I would just ask each of you to stop back and think a little bit about the number of devices in your house itself that would be connecting to the internet. And if you look at that, it's probably 3 per person, 4 per person, possibly more. Each of us has a phone, possibly an iPad, a computer, an Amazon Fire Stick, a smartwatch. All of these are connecting to the internet. So it's certainly a multiple of the number of people who have access to the internet. And mind you, that's not a big number. It's not like 100% of today's the entire population of the world has internet access. It's probably closer to 40%. But it's just the number of devices that are connecting. So to look at the IoT verticals, it's really consumer IoT that we really hear about. It's phones, wearables, TVs, appliances, home automation, connected cars, etc. And then we're hearing a lot of commercial IoT these days, which is smart buildings, smart cities, a lot of work happening in India on smart cities, energy. And the last part is really the industrial IoT that we'll spend talking about, and why I feel that this is going to be a significant value creator over the next few years. Apart from this, there is of course specific industry specific verticals that have very specialized applications of IoT. And I will actually pick an example from the healthcare industry. One is because I personally have spent a lot of time in the industry and know that industry quite closely. And secondly, because it's so much relevant in today's pandemic age. So this is what the chief economist of GE has to say. It's really attention that has been focused so far on the consumer internet. But now it's, we are talking about shopping, we're talking about moving around, managing, smart systems in our house, etc., etc. But now the value creation is really move towards the industry. Let me start with big data, and I'm sure all of you have seen this, and there are multiple definitions. It could be 5 V's, somebody would say it's 4 V's, somebody would say it's 6 V's. But essentially, when we talk about big data, there are 5 things that we speak about. One is the data that we generate, particularly from all of these new technologies, is at scale. So we're talking terabytes, petabytes. Even at Pidilite, even for something as simple as end user data, which is data that our contractors generate on our mobile apps, we're talking of gigabytes and terabytes of data. We are talking of crores of records that get generated in a day or in a month. We are talking of, and then is there the veracity of data? It's uncertain, it's imprecise, it's not up to date. There is no organization today that can only talk about structured data. There's a lot of unstructured data. There's a lot of things that people talk about brands in social media, etc., etc. And companies need to keep an eye out for that. And then there is streaming real-time data. The real big question in front of any practitioner of technology today is, how do you generate value from this? There's a lot of data for sure, but converting data into information, data into insights, that's where the maximum value gets created. Now this is a bit of a McKinsey representation on different areas and where maximum value could be created. And I'm going to just spend a couple of examples, talking about a couple of examples here. I know that you have a forecasting workshop coming up later in the evening. But a simple example for us, for example, Pidilite is in the construction chemicals business. Dr. Fixit is a very well-known brand for us. Forecasting even till date is largely around time series data and fitting some seasonal time series regression models around historical data. But is it really contemporary for our needs? For example, waterproofing business is highly dependent on rainfall. It's highly seasonal. People think of waterproofing only when there is rain outside, right? So why should we not look at weather data, for example, when we forecast demand for a Dr. Fixit? There are excellent examples, and you can Google them and you will find them, on how companies like JSW for their power and steel plants have used IoT very effectively to generate savings of hundreds of crores in a year. There are examples of organizations that used market sensing to categorize and place similar moving SKUs that typically move together, particularly in cosmetic, food. The idea is to, if a set of SKUs move together, the idea is to stock them at the same place in the warehouse, so the entire picking time is reduced. And while these seem small, when you add up for a large company, it generates enormous amount of savings. This is the care example that I was talking about. And since we are now talking about vaccine and vaccine distribution, I thought this would be particularly relevant on how IoT can transform healthcare, the entire healthcare value chain. From the standpoint of time and moving forward quickly, I will just focus, and of the objective of this particular webinar is really focused on supply chain and operations. So I will just focus on this part. But suffice it to say that right from drug discovery to development of drugs, to manufacturing, to warehousing and distribution, to sales and marketing, to patient care, each of these there is opportunity for IoT to be used, for big data to be generated, from insights to be generated. There are even today significant amount of analytics that is being used by organizations to reduce, let's say, the time, cost and effort that goes into predictive maintenance. So just by predicting when a part is going to fail or when a machine is going to fail, there is tremendous savings to be made. And it is not that these savings come out of stopping machine failure. These savings merely come out of predicting it, making sure that you have your equipment lined up for the failure when it happens. So essentially, what is IoT? So IoT at its very basic level is really it's a network of objects that are connected to the internet, that have an IP address at its very basic level. Essentially, it takes a physical property, which is like a pressure or humidity or temperature, and converts it into a digital mode where it's stored as a number, right? So that's what IoT is really at its core about. Vaccine supplies and integrated cold chain management has been in the news for quite some time. Now imagine the supply chains of the past have been essentially static, have been actually capturing static data. So there have been, for the past few years, many companies have been using data loggers that just keep temperature data. So it just keeps recording the temperature data, and the data doesn't really go anywhere. And at the end of the shipment reaches the destination, you can take that data in your system and see what's been the temperature, put it in a time series and see if there's been any excursion and all that. That in today's world is actually too late. The supply chain of today, the expectation is that you intervene when it's required, intervene at the right time, so that you save the entire shipment from being wasted, which is exactly what is happening in today's in entire vaccine supply chain. I have seen in my past role, I have evaluated devices where more than a dozen variables can be tracked in a single device, and the device is of the size of a mobile phone. It costs $20. It's probably a little bigger than a mobile phone. It's like a 1000 milliampere battery power bank. It's as big as that, as heavy as that, and it costs about $20. And these are the set of variables that it can track. It is GSM SIM enabled, which means that it is not just tracking, it's also transmitting that device, transmitting all these variables, which is temperature, humidity, pressure. So it is not just about location. People typically think about temperature and location. There's also a lot of other insights that can be got by just tracking of these variables. So there is location, there is movement, there is orientation, there is drop, there is vibration. The mobile phone that you are carrying today has over 10 sensors. So all of these sensors, which is a gyroscope, accelerometer, all of these are available in your mobile phone. It's available in the cheapest mobile phone today, which means that the costs of these sensors are actually going down, and it can give you not only tremendous a large amount of information, which is really big data, but also help you in other applications like geofencing sensitive products. For example, there are a lot of drugs which are restricted in the healthcare industry, and you don't want the shipment to move beyond a certain defined corridor. And whenever it moves, you could set up a geofence to capture any movement that happens outside of that corridor. And then there is other things like drop, there is other things like light, anything that damaged, anything that gets exposed to light could get damaged, etc., etc. I had done a similar presentation to one of our vendor user meets in California a couple of years ago, and one of the presenters in that symposium, I was talking to him on the sidelines, and he said that he had such a device in this was a pharma distributor, and he said he had a device like this that he could monitor on his phone. So he could monitor. He was the operations head of that organization. He could monitor the location of a shipment on the phone. And he said one time there was a case where a drug shipment was sitting on the airport tarmac for over 8 hours, and I knew that the temperature is based on the sensor data that was streaming through to him. He knew that the temperature was going close to becoming an excursion, and the shipment would have to be scrapped. And he could intervene at that point of time to make sure that got loaded onto the aircraft and got shipped out. So that is the power of real-time monitoring. I'll just move to the next topic, which is how can companies actually make sense and use of this data? And I think cloud technologies have a lot to offer here, for 3 or 4 simple reasons. One is it's far more easier to deploy. An IoT platform is far easier deployed on the cloud. Cloud provides a single source of truth. You can access it from anywhere. A lot of the supply chains today suffer from asymmetry of information. You have information that's coming from different places which is not quite the same, and cloud removes that by being a single source of truth. It enables a lot of collaboration between suppliers, channel partners. You can exchange the same data. The same data is interpreted in exactly the same manner, regardless of which side you are on. It allows you to scale. Cloud allows you scaling options that On-premise architectures do not. And last but not least, it is very difficult for companies, even large companies, to set up the infrastructure that is required to manage large volumes of data. So cloud enables that analytics in real time if it's required. If you want intervention in real time based on streaming data, cloud enables you to scale and do that. And if it's non-real time as well, it allows you to handle large volumes of data. I'm pretty much coming to the end. This is my last real slide. And these are I think this is something that these are the kind of skills that will be in demand in the future. I think the systems that we established today, the number of sensors that we are putting out in the market today, will generate big data in the years to come. Companies going forward will want to analyze more and more of that data. We are just happy with capturing it today. Tomorrow we'll expect that to be analyzed better. We'll expect to get insights from it. We'll expect to win in the market based on that. Today it's a select set of companies in India in India and globally that actually hire data scientists. And these are really, for me, it's a professional with a blend of mathematics, statistics, and computer programming. Tomorrow we'll find more and more organizations hiring data scientists. Citizen data scientist is a term that Gartner uses. Translator is a term that McKinsey uses, but I think it essentially means the same. It's regular professionals doing their day jobs as a demand planner or a supply planner, etc., who are hands-on and have necessary skills to imagine and repurpose data to help their organizations make decisions in the market. I think these are the skills that will be in demand. Somebody who's not skilled in data will certainly not have the competitive advantage that's required in the marketplace of today. So I think it's professionals with these skills at the higher end that will be the most employable in the future. The opportunities would be global, it would be industry agnostic. The best part about data science skill set is that you can move fairly seamlessly from one industry to another. As long as the understanding of the domain and the business is intrinsically there. The opportunities would be with boutique startups, Fortune 500 companies, as permanent employees, as gig workers. So I think these are really skills for the future. I think the demand and supply gap is just too big right now. The US itself is short by about 150,000 data scientists, and just extrapolate that and imagine what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years as we keep generating more and more data. So these are the key messages that I wanted to leave you with. I've already spoken about this. We're really moving from a consumer internet to an industrial internet. We will move towards supply chain big data. The supply chain of the future will be expected to predict and not merely respond. Every company at some stage, at some level, and at some scale will adopt cloud. And really, a data science skill set is the skill set that one would want to write on one's CV to maintain one's competitive edge in the market. So this is really what I had to share. I'm happy to answer any questions, although I really don't think I would have the answers, but I'm happy to discuss if anybody has any points to make.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a really insightful presentation. And thank you for giving us industrial insights on the relevance of data in this day and age. And I'm sure that all the engineers in the room related to the part where you said that mathematics is for the geeks, but it's also the winning formula now. So I'm sure that was relatable for everybody. We have a few questions flowing in the chat. So, sir, do you want me to pick up questions from there?
I'll leave it to you.
Okay, sir. So the first question is from Surbhi. She asked that what are the key areas that we can focus on learning right now during our MBA to build our career in technology plus operations domain?
So I think I already spoke about it. I think there is these, to my mind, it is two or three things that matter. Even for a technology professional, I think for a professional to be successful, the first and foremost, it's an absolute solid understanding of business. That's important. Otherwise, I see a lot of people who speak technology and who implement technology for the sake of implementing technology. So, first of all, I think the most important thing is to understand and know business. Those are that for me is the foundation. A lot of initiatives and a lot of projects today fail for not reasons of technology, they fail for reasons of change management. And managing change is probably one of the single most important criteria that defines success and failure. So change management is another thing. And I do feel the third thing that's really important from a technology operations domain is data. And I already spoke at length about it, so I won't belabor that anymore. But I think increasingly we'll generate more data, and the most successful people will know what is to be done with that data.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Professor Jayaraman. So he loves the concept of the 5 V's. And if you could throw some light in which one of the 4 V's is more important for the 5th V, that is value.
No, I think I don't think it is a question of which of the 4 V's is important. What that slide was trying to say is that the data that we get will be characterized by these 4 V's. So there will be velocity, there will be veracity, there will be whatever. What was the? Let me just go back and maybe do a better job of answering that question.
Velocity,
velocity, volume. So it's not. I wouldn't say one V is important and the one V is more important than the other V. These are the 4 characteristics of that data. So, like it or not, the data will be at volume. You will not be sure of the data. There will be a variety of data, structured, unstructured, and it will be streaming. It will come really fast. We're generating a lot of data. So all of these will happen, and the appropriate putting together of all of that data will generate value. Is what the slide is trying to say. I'm sorry if it was a bit misrepresented there.
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up, or is it too many questions are coming up?
Yeah, it's
just only one follow-up question. The idea of asking the idea was that all of these things is going to cost money. There is too much of data, and then you want to process it very fast. You need bigger clouds and all that. So therefore, any company, I read a lot of stuff which says that companies want to know what is the cost of inducting IoT and what is the benefit. So the value is obviously the benefit. So should the company be doing all this, or only maybe target only a variety, or only target getting data and volumes?
Yeah, I think I had done a similar in the conference that I spoke about. I had done a similar presentation on how companies should approach it, and I think it's important. You're absolutely right. It is too much for every company will have a limitation on the funds, resources, people, etc. that are available to do anything, and hence it's important to pick the use cases where the size of the prize is the highest, and hence pick those use cases where we know maximum value is to be extracted and go after those use cases. I also think it is very important that we reorient towards a fail fast kind of approach, where we quickly implement something, do a pilot, and the pilot can be done in as quick as 4 days, in 4 weeks, look at results, decide whether this thing works or not if it doesn't move forward. and I think it's very important to pick your battles. Capturing data for the sake of capturing data, trying to cover everything, trying to carpet bomb or boil the ocean, whatever you call it, I don't think that's a strategy that is going to be very popular in most companies.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. We do have a couple of more questions, but in the interest of time, we can direct them to you later. And
Sure, I'll be happy to answer.
yeah, thank you so much, sir. I would now like to request Devmala sir to say a few words.
Thank you, Agrima. So, it's always great to have people like Mayur starting the conclave. It's a very interesting conclave that we started last year, and we would have loved to have Mayur and the panel members in the institution would have had an entire day spent together. But unfortunately, because of the current conditions, we are running it in an online medium. But when I look at the enthusiasm among the people, organizers, typically both the supply chain and operations committee, IM committee, the professors, mentors, and the students, it feels great to have conceived an idea and doing a conclave like that. I won't take much time, but a quick thought process, because this is going to be discussed in detail in the panel and successive workshop. But when I look at data and getting data, it is a two-way sword, and therefore it's very important to handle it with care, because as you start generating data, it sometimes can be misleading as well. And I'll tell a quick story. Many of you might be knowing that story, but during the World War II, when the flights were coming back, returning to the base, they observed that the flights were hit by the bullets. And they figured out that there are portions in which the flights were hit by the bullets. So the people who understood statistic crunching data, they believe that, okay, these are the places where the bullets are generally hitting the flights, the aircrafts, and they started guarding those places in the aircraft. And eventually what happened, one mathematician came ahead and said, hang on, what about those flights which did not come to the base? Essentially, these are the flights which could survive the bullets, and therefore they are back, and hence those are the portions which are not as sensitive as it looks like. You better guard the places where there was no bullet hit in these flights which came back. So essentially, understanding data and taking it forward in the decision making is an ever interesting field. And I believe a conclave like that probably helps us to learn things better. With that, I thank Mayur and all the panelists for taking the discussion forward. I'm sure all of us would learn a lot of things from the participants. And yeah, thank you very much. I pass it on to Agrima again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to the next leg of our conclave, we have an esteemed panel from the industry and the academia. We would now like to introduce our esteemed guest for the panel discussion, beginning with Mr. Bragadeesh S. Mr. Bragadeesh is currently the head of analytics at Daimler India Commercial Vehicles. He is specialized in business and technology consulting. He is deeply involved in utilizing analytics and deep learning methodologies such as computer vision and NLP to solve problems and delivering value to the consumers. He has decades of experience in dealing with design solutions and has built a chatbot using a simple neural network. Prior to his working in Daimler India, he has worked in Standard Chartered Bank. He has completed his MBA from IIT Madras and done his engineering from BITS Plani, Goa campus. We welcome you to the event, sir.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to be a part of your program.
Thank you, sir.
Our next panelist, Mr. Shamindra Bosu, leads the business advisory practice of IBM in India. As delivery executive at IBM India South Asia, he has been associated with some of the first of a kind supply chain and business transformation engagements for consumer products and industrial clients in India. His focus areas include future operating model development and supply chain and operations transformation. He has delivered multiple large-scale projects in complex environments while leading heterogeneous cross-functional teams. He's a regular speaker in industry forums and guest lecturer at premier B schools in India. Prior to joining IBM, Mr. Shamindra led some of the key supply chain initiatives at ITC Limited and was involved in the areas of operations excellence and planning in Praxair, India. We heartily welcome you, sir.
Good afternoon, team, and it's always pleasure to be back with the alumni.
Thank you, sir. Our next panelist for the event is Dr. Bobby Chaitanya. Dr. Bobby Chaitanya Villari is an architect in data science and artificial intelligence at UST. He holds a decade's experience in industrial, R&D, and academic research. He did his PhD in Information Systems Management from IIM Kozhikode. Prior to that, he did electrical and electronics engineering from BIT Planning. Currently, he works in deep learning space, particularly in computer vision and NLP domains. At Wipro's CTO AI research, he led an NLP team that developed AI ML products applying automated question answering systems, natural language inference, conversational AI, knowledge graphs, and automatic data annotation. We are pleased to have you with us today, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice, and thanks, team. I'm pleased to be here. Thanks, Mayur, for the presentation, and thanks, professors, for all the questions. I was interested in all the questions that you were asking, and thanks, Mayur, for answering them.
Thank you, sir. We would now like to introduce the moderators of our panel discussion, our very own committee heads. Professor Ashitosh Jha is an assistant professor in the information management area at SPJIMR, Mumbai. He holds a PhD in management information systems from IIM Calcutta, and his research interests include adoption and diffusion of mobile innovations, techno-economics of next-generation networks, radio spectrum management, e-governance, and ICTs for human development.
Our second moderator is Dr. Lijo John. Dr. Lijo John is an assistant professor in operations and supply chain area at SPJIMR, Mumbai. He completed his PhD from IIM Kozhikode. His research areas include humanitarian logistics, supply chain management, and supply chain contracts. His research has appeared in renowned international journals such as Annals of Operations Research, ANOR, International Journal of Services and Operations Management, to name a few. We would now request all the attendees to send in their questions simultaneously in the chat during the panel discussion. Your questions shall be directed to the panelists towards the end of the discussion. We look forward to an enriching discussion. The virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you, Agrima and Alice, for such a wonderful introduction and inviting the panelists and us to this event. I'll just start by saying a quick few words, and I'll just try to set a context for the discussion. So the point is very simple. We all know that management in general has always been data driven, or always wanted some sort of data to make decisions. It's not a new thing. And since probably the scientific revolution, the concept of using data for making decisions has been there. And supply chain obviously is no different. Operations management has never been far away from that. But what has changed in last decade as we see is the way we could collect data, the speed with which the data could be collected. And thanks to the giants and leaps in the information technology primarily, the amount of data, the ease with which it has been collected has changed a lot. And that has actually led to a domain or a change in the paradigm, the way supply chains are also collecting data, primarily which was not so easily collectible a few decades back. But though we have so much of data, how good are we doing with it? To answer that, a recent report published by Accenture Consulting, they found that nearly 37%, or rather only 37% of the companies have got any idea or any full-fledged big data analytics plan, whereas nearly 60% of the companies, even today, depend on some sort of ad hoc big data analytics for the supply chain. Now, we all know that big data is the big buzzword and we all get to hear it. But the practice in the industry says that it's not there yet, or at least there's a long way to go. So under this context, there are a few obvious questions that we need to ask. First one would be like, how and why does the current industry sees big data in supply chain? And what are these areas where big data supply chains are currently being used in the current industry? Or what are those specific areas where it gets most attention of the 37% that we talked about? And more importantly, has COVID-19 pandemic accelerated, decelerated, changed the trajectory of the way we've been looking at the big data and supply chain? These are some of the questions that we will be asking the panelists, and I'm sure based on their vast experience, they will be to shed some light. So I request my colleague, Professor Ashutosh, to start the discussion. Over to you, Professor Ashutosh.
Thanks a lot, Lijo. Thank you so much. Thank you, Agriman, Alice. A very warm welcome to the panelists, Bragadeesh, Shamindra, Bobby. Thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for setting the context, Professor Lijo. I just, without further ado, I would want to sort of start with the first principles and get a sense of each of your perspectives on how supply chain is being reshaped today, and what role does data and data-driven decision making, including analytics, is having on such supply chain systems. So maybe I can start with Shamindra. Shamindra, would you please share your perspective, on how the supply chain today is getting impacted by these data-driven decision-making mechanisms, including analytics and AI and so on and so forth?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jha. And I think the way Mayur started the session, it broadly set a platform for our discussion. So let me set a broader context, and hopefully some of the points that Dr. John brought up in terms of the answers to be arrived at during this panel discussion during the course of next possibly 60 minutes, we'll try to cover that. But just to set the broader perspective, so there has obviously been a lot of things that are happening in supply chain from decision making using data, right? I will just want to refer a certain Harvard Business School review article that was published in June 2018. Which created a lot of flutter among many of our supply chain professionals, right? This review was called the Death of Supply Chain Management. It was a very short article, but obviously, given the nature of the headline, it created significant flutter. And what was it really talking about? Essentially, supply chain as a function, if we look back a little bit, we realize that over the years, supply chain as a function has always been generating a lot of data. It is not that just now it has suddenly generated data. Obviously, with exponential technologies like IoT that Mayur mentioned, it has added to new use cases, right? So as a function, it was always generating a lot of structured data. Now, with the new exponential technologies, what has happened, the entire hypothesis of that short article was that it is today possible, theoretically, to eliminate all inhuman interventions in the supply chain function. Whether in terms of doing it in the execution side, planning side, intelligence, etc. Right? That was the essential hypothesis that was propagated in that article, which created so much flutter. With that backdrop, and obviously that was essentially a long-term view of things, and I think today we are far from there. But with that premise, let me lay out, given my experience in the industry, probably three broad trends that I see where decision-making with data and how it's moving, right? The first premise, I think, is where Mayur spent a lot of time, and I'll not probably belabor that point, is apart from all the other transaction system data that used to be always available to us, the new forms of data today that have been available to us is in the case of state of supply chain. And when I say state of supply chain, what does it mean? It means Today, we don't get just data from our transaction systems in terms of understanding what happened in number of sales, how accurate was my demand forecast, how accurate was my inventory placement. But today, I am also able to ascertain, and in some cases very easily, where is my truck placed? What is happening in my distribution node? What is the state of my asset and the health of my asset in my manufacturing? What is the inventory position of my liquid in my dispenser? So the state of supply chain nodes and assets has become a very interesting new addition in this whole journey of data. So that's one big point. And there was a significant amount that was covered by Mayur, so I will not repeat those. The second point or the trend that I see, and I'll probably spend a little bit time in explaining what is happening and why this is becoming the second trend. If I just reflect back a little bit, and this was happening even before this pandemic, but in the pandemic, what did we see? We saw that when we are looking at demand, there were sharp fluctuations in demand, not just in quantity, but sharp deviations in terms of basket of products that are being sold and the location in where they're being sold, right? And obviously, and many of my esteemed panelists will later talk about demand forecasting, etc. But the fundamental point that I'm driving here is there was certain sharp variabilities in my SKU demand node combinations. Now, what it forced many of the supply chain professionals to do was to then understand and reinterpret my static segmentations was not working, because with your static segmentation, you had specific strategies that you had adopted, whether it is a fast moving product, slow moving product, it's a niche product, how I am actually aligning my distribution change, my replacement strategies. All of this is today linked to a initial segmentation. Now, when your fundamental premise of the segmentation is shifting, which means you have to now dynamically do that segmentation, and all your strategies need to be aligned. This is far difficult than the way I'm saying it, because as supply chain professionals, we all understand there are network linkages, there are production allocations linked to it, there are truck building issues linked to it, all of this, right? That's one. Second, on the network side, now one particular example I'll give, and there were very several other network implications that we handled during the period. But one particular example I'll give with the many companies, because of the constraints they had in their warehouses, the capacities that got locked in their plants, etc., were looking for direct shipments. Again, direct shipment is an extremely complex affair in a supply chain context, because when you talk about your highest volume products and your biggest customers, you can always have those truck builds and you can send it. But any logistics professional will tell you this completely makes your supply chain unbalanced, because then you are struggling with all those SKUs which are small, which cannot build truck, and then you are struggling with what are the filler materials I do, and you start exploding your entire logistics cost scenario. Third, because there was such a high variability of demand, then we are talking about misplacement of inventory, and every company was struggling with that. Now, when you have done it, the question is, what do you do after that? And that's where the decision making starts kicking in. Even if I take a very simple medium-sized CPG company, which is probably operating with 500 active SKUs, probably 50 odd nodes, including the DCs and manufacturing plants and the linkages, we are talking about millions of combinations of decisions in this whole problem. Now, how do you do dynamic inventory redeployment in such scenarios becomes an extremely important and complex process to manage in this situation. Fourth, in logistics, and typically if you see the industry behavior earlier, it was essentially looking at what is my predicted loads across each of my lanes. Now, for each of these lanes, I would typically then do my optimization. I'll design my network. I'll predict what is my optimal trucking mix that is going to go around each of this, and then I will do annual contracts. I will actually contract certain vendors, certain rates, etc. Now, when you have a dynamic scenario like this, and I was discussing with the head of one of the tire manufacturing companies, during this period, his entire demand shifted from OEMs and urban to rural. And he was selling two-wheelers, tires in the rural segment. Now, those were loads he had never imagined. those were linkages and contracts he had never established, and he did not. Then he was essentially trying to figure out how do I dynamically service this demand. That was the other part. And fifth part, sorry, is obviously when you are looking at such variabilities, the biggest impact ultimately lands up in your manufacturing capacities, because that's where you're then struggling. How I'm matching my RM, how I'm matching my PM, how I'm going to go do my race scheduling, because you are no longer sitting with that monthly cycle and monthly planning. It doesn't work, right? The reason I spend a little bit of time in illustrating these issues is that one big shift that is happening today in supply chain is greater focus in decision support system in execution. Gone are the days when Oliver Wright in the 80s designed the SNOP, right? When there was information asymmetry, you did not have information, and we had planning buckets of months and 3 months and 6 months because we did not know what is happening at the end supply chain. We no longer reside in that era. We reside in an era that every organization, even if they're not using the data, is aware what is being sold today, what is happening in his node today, and even in a couple of nodes down, because that's how they have got their entire systems integrated. And in that environment, doing analytics in driving execution is becoming far more important and bigger trend to manage, because you are doing dynamic segmentation, you are doing dynamic deployment planning, you are doing dynamic inventory redeployment, etc. So that's one very big shift in terms of use of data science in supply chain domain that's happening there, right? And the third domain, I'll touch upon it, and I know my esteemed colleagues will speak about it, is there has been a significant shift in terms of the use cases that have evolved in data science space. Earlier, the larger focus, and even 15 years back when we used to do it, largely we used to do network optimization. We would occasionally do multi-echelon inventory optimization and those kind of use cases, right? But thanks to the evolution of both the compute power and the data analytics techniques that have evolved, the nature of use cases have shifted dramatically. Probably, Dr. Jha, I will pause with that and hand the baton back to you.
Thank you so much, Shamindra. So I wanted to go to Bragadeesh, and because some of the aspects you touched upon, I think Bragadeesh is right in the middle of dealing with all those aspects. So Bragadeesh, in your own experience, if you can share with us from some perspectives which will be beneficial to our students, right? And sort of give them a proper range of understanding, so to speak. That will be helpful. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Jha, and thank you, Shamindra, for the start. And it was actually very insightful. So many points were discussed. What I just want to add to what Shamindra was also saying. At this moment, right? With a lot of new technologies like the big data, or just to take the data on a structured or an unstructured basis, we have a lot of data. But the question remains that what do we do with this data? So how do we make the best use of the data to arrive at a pattern, or to take some sort of a decision? Now that is actually quite challenging, because there are tons of data which is being generated on a daily basis, which we don't have an idea how to make sense of it. So this is quite a big challenge. Now setting up the infrastructure to gather this data is I don't think is a big challenge, because now we have advanced technology. I think he was also mentioning about the compute powers. So now we have the cloud infrastructure. You don't have to rely on an on-prem infrastructure where you need at least 3 to 4 months to set up all the stuffs. But now at the click of a button, you can procure or own virtual machines on a cloud. So setting up the infrastructure should not be a big challenge. But once I get the data, how do I make use of this data? Right. So that is a very important thing that needs to be solved. Right. So this data can be used to make a business decision which can differentiate between you and your competitors. Right. For example, having the sensors on a vehicle which can know what is the state of the consignment which is going, right, on how the truck or a vehicle behaves. So what is the behavior of the driver who is driving it, whether the route that he's chosen to reach the destination is the right or not, right? The shortest distance may not be the best route, right? Owing to the road conditions, the toll charges, etc. There are so many parameters that comes into it, right? So having all this information and bringing into a correct business decision takes a lot of learning, right? So this is where the experience and the business knowledge comes into picture. So this is one of the aspects. When it comes to the supply chain aspect, there are the vendors and the suppliers who supply part to, right? Apart from the demand forecasting, it is also important to know what is the quality of the supplies that they supply. So how to forecast whether they are supplying a defective part or probably a good part. So with that aspect, can I know that which are all the vendors and the corresponding parts, whether they are of defective of nature or not? Because if I know this information prior, using some forecasting methodologies like your ARMA, ARIMA, or even now in your Facebook Profit, I will know how to balance my production based on the supplies I receive. So I have a product which needs 10 parts. So there's 10 parts. If I know what is the availability and the defective parts supplied by each of the suppliers, then I can correlate to how I build the particular product and at what time. Right. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is that now the demand is constantly changing. So if I build a particular product or a variant, that same variant may not be sold. They might be asked for some of the changes. A recent example is when we are trying to transfer some of the vaccines, right? The container itself is it's a different one. It's a reefer container. It's a refrigeration container, right? How to make those, right? So in this current situations, the demands will keep on changing. How do we adapt to those changes? So that is a very key challenge. So for that, to my existing stock, can I do a vehicle conversion to match the demand what is being given by the marketing and sales, right? So these are the other aspect that also we need to think. The other one is owing to the current political situations, we might have to think about changing the vendors from a particular country also. How do we adapt to that? Now, even in your budget discussion, there were some import duties, taxes, which have been levied for some of the parts. How do we tackle that? So why I'm saying all these things is that these are also important in managing a supply chain. A particular part when it's been imported has a higher duty price, or there has been regulation that no more importing, all the things has to be done locally. How do you manage that? How do you adapt to that? So these are the very key challenges. Apart from the data discussions that we're having, these are the logistic part that we need to have more focus on, right? And coming back to the data, like I mentioned, this data can be as valuable as you think, right? And also to identify which are the correct parameters to choose to arrive at a right decision also makes a lot. Because there are some aspects wherein I have a lot of data, but I choose the wrong kind of a data to arrive at a conclusion which will backfire, right? So I'll hold on to this thought. So probably we would like to hear more from Bobby in the next discussion. So then we can move on and build up from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Bragadeesh. So, Bobby, Bragadeesh spoke about demand estimation remaining, so to speak, one of the most important tasks that is there, right? And I know you having deep expertise in AI and several other newly emerging technologies in sort of and applying them in several supply chain areas. Would you please share your perspective as to how these technologies are becoming extremely important, especially in demand estimation and similar such important concepts?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Bragadeesh. Thanks, Shamindra. And you guys have taken out all the points that I thought I had planned to speak. So I'll, because that happens in all panel discussions, all our notes goes. But let me discuss the way you told. You have set me a point, Ashitosh. Thank you. Then we'll focus on how would leading manager and future leaders in our 104 to 120 participants we have. We take out 10 of us, and the rest all being the students. They all discussing about or thinking about what would the industry do, where would I be placed, what do I know, am I good enough? That will just use this discussion with Brigadier you and Professor and Shamindra to take it out. If Mayur is present, maybe we'll take his opinion. What I would ask is, now it is accepted that supply chain digitalization is there. We have to go cloud infrastructure. Yes, it will take away initial cost and the barriers to entry. and now these are already accepted. But suddenly, a manager, a leader from our students would go to industry and maybe assisting a CEO or a CTO or a CIO, and the CIO asks which there are lots of floods in China, and we are producing um, the following computer components. Which parts are affected by these floods? I just got a news in China, and it is very difficult for that manager to just go read the news, find out, and get to the point, and make a decision in that time. Okay, and it's not feasible also. So if Shamindra would know that IBM is particularly having a data product on that, prescriptive analytics, and it reads news, that reads news, it understands what's there, and it knows what's there in your supply chain and which part of that is being affected. For example, this is a kind of pandemic, isn't it? Now I take away pandemic also. Now I have a strategic competitor who buys all the components. They know that okay, maybe I am the big guy, and I have a lot of money. I just got a funding. I just want to flourish in my business. I'll give my product for free for a year. It could be anything. So I'll buy all the product. Just I'll kill my competition. Okay, then that guy buys all the products. What happens to my business if my competitor is buying all the products, and which is the cheapest, so that even if a screw is gone, my production of an electric vehicle will stop. I'm a new electric vehicle manufacturer, and how am I being killed? And questions like this. For example, what happened historically, if a price of a particular product has changed, maybe the petroleum has changed, and then what happened to my supply chain, and who is getting affected, who is stopping the production, where should I have an alternative? And questions like this keep on coming to all the managers. Uh, all of our management students would be facing questions day by day, and these questions cannot be answered by human beings straight away. When Bragadeesh was telling about how to deal with data, that's the point. And you have data, and when you know what data you require, you also should know how to deal with that data, at least in ideas. Uh, so AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, it can be used alternatively, but when you go technically, each is a subset of another. There is a deep learning that comes up, and there are reinforcement learning and artificial general intelligence, as they call. What I appeal to our students is, do not be bogged down by any of these terms. Everything can be learned. Even any person who has learned it now or invented new stuff must have learned it some time ago. Mathematics has been there, and it is far more easier now to learn about this than before. With the advent of artificial intelligence, for example, if you're seeing any of us, the background I can change, and when I'm moving, I tend to move my chair quite frequently. If I move, the video gets obstructed. For example, Professor Ashitosh's background, he has changed it to optimized. If he keeps moving, there is a blur that comes. This is a data product that is put. So you design. Most of the times MBAs are supposed to do the product leader roles. You will be speaking about, or you will be knowing about what happens and what to do, what the product should do. Please scope your ideas about and around that. You would be fairly successful. And when it comes to supply chain and AI, yes, I'll go back to what I thought. Most of the points covered by Shamindra and Bragadeesh, but what we don't need to accept anymore, it's not new anymore. Our supply chain digitization, it's not new anymore. Every data should be digitized. And supply chain solutions moving to the cloud, yes, we have got. And as always, right from the days when we were studying supply chains or as operations management courses, uh, the sustainability has always been the case. And from now onwards, maybe coming 2 years, I see what happens in pandemics will be a course that will be flooded with. You guys will be knowing what happens in pandemic. But what happens in pandemic, the sustainability questions on sustainability will rise. And again, with following the news properly, supply chain is moving towards circular supply chains, which means previously it was there, you are using the old products into making the new products. For example, our government has come up with a point that any petrol vehicle should not stay on the roads for more than 15 years. What happens to all those vehicles? You have to recycle, upcycle them again, get this fuel injection, get the microcontrollers. Typically, an industry grade microcontroller can work for 30 years or more, but some components of the car, the chassis, cannot work from that point. So you can upcycle, get the circular supply chain into act. Again, the next one you could have studied in your courses, where our professors will be discussing, at least in one form or another, is an agile supply chain. What happens when an omni-channel supply chain, which is very different from a multi-channel supply chain, where you have a list of products in a supply chain. You buy one product, you will also be part of another product, and you are, for example, maybe Starbucks, some of you have gone, gives you points. Maybe when you buy a Starbucks coffee, you'll get a points card. From that card, you can buy gifts from other vendors around. This happens typically in all US stores, which means Starbucks people have to know what's happening in the other stores as well, which means the supply chain of Starbucks should be accommodative, which means if they give 5 points and the customer cannot buy any product with 5 points of those 5 points are useless. Okay, that will create some dissatisfaction in a customer, or at least the app should show some of those products that they can buy with the points they have got up to now, which means they need to know what's happening in other supply chains as well, which means the omni-channel supply chains, which is the trend previously. Now it should be augmented by our AI, which will also tell us what to do, which place to buy. When you are moving in a car, it will tell where you should be buying what products, if at all you try to put into an app what you need to know. And from descriptive analytics, where you have got the data, you understood what it is, to predictive, which means you have got the data and you have understood the data. A flat file is now transferred into a column based file where you know what it is, and you have built a model on the top of that, like how Bragadeesh was speaking about. And from there, you want your artificial intelligence agent to do what is called prescriptive analytics in our terms. What essentially it means is, you have to, like a futuristic manager, like a proactive manager, you have to analyze the scenario 1, 2, 3. What happens here? Like the question I asked, what happens, all my smallest part of the screws is bought out by somebody, what production component would be stopped? What happens if I have to do a due diligence there to have an alternative product? Similar to that, do a scenario analysis and give all the inputs at the go, which means you can't get the data at the point when you want it, but you have to keep on collecting the data, find the data, and have your analysis together. When somebody asks a question in fair terms, I am a manager and my background is into finance, and I am not a SQL or SQL coder. I cannot go into the database and then do select star from the user's database where so and so should happen. I cannot do all that on the go. What I will do is I'll pick up a phone, I'll call my chatbot. Bragadeesh should be knowing that. Call a chatbot and then ask the chatbot, okay, call it, for example, Alice is my chatbot for now. Alice, what's happening? Where and when I should keep my warehouse, so that I can be safe during the floods in China. I can be safe. All my production will not stop. I have to buy all the product from China. I have to keep it somewhere. Where is that? And then Alice will trigger the AI channel and then keep it. And all this is good as a product leader, which you would be in future. You don't need to go and understand each and every nuance of it, because the time is not enough. We'll be living for 60 years, 70 years in this pressure, maybe less. Uh, but please understand that you need to know what AI can do and understand the tricks which it is following. No need to code, and don't be afraid of it. But if you want to know what it is, yes, AI can do limit. Sab upar wala karega will not, which means AI cannot do multiple things without data. Only with data, AI can do something. And limitations are there. Please understand the limitations and design the product in such a way, for example, here's a supply chain product where all the questions which I asked could be answered using a data science um, product or an architecture called knowledge graph, where graphs, our computer science students among us would know the graph. Social network is a graph, and there are nodes. There is some kind of transmission from the nodes to the leaves of it. A knowledge graph can answer all these questions typically by scraping the web and keeping the knowledge of it. Yes, there are products available right away. Please keep knowing what products are available, what AI products are available. All of them, please keep reading, like you read HBR notes, like you read Gartner reports, like you read PwC reports. You keep also all this, have an AI journal of your own um, notes and your own understanding. How much, how deep you want to dwell into, that's your case. Number one, don't be afraid of it, but keep diligent, because yesterday what you know is extent tomorrow, and maybe today it's the only time you might be using it. So don't be worried about all the investment you have put into yesterday that may or may not be useful tomorrow, but use it today. With that, I'll take a pause,
Yeah,
Dr. Ashitosh.
thanks, Bobby. So I think you have mentioned quite a many important concepts which our students, would have anyway, gone through in various courses, but in a disjointed fashion, right? Let me go to Bragadeesh and try to understand. Bragadeesh, if you can, highlight using some use cases, some generic use cases through your experience, how some of these concepts which Bobby has spoken, and how some of the important concepts that which you teach in the classroom, how are they actually getting implemented, right? Probably that will help students sort of get these understandings sort of concretized in their mind, right? And in a many in applied way. So
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Dr. Jha. And also, I see one of the question asking how data analytics plays a role in supply chain management. I think I'll connect both of them.
yeah,
So, to talk about the use cases, right? So, first thing, as I mentioned in my earlier talk, is that forecasting what is the defective piece from a part from each of one of the suppliers. So, that is one that you can do. Second thing is that you can also build a clustering algorithm to find out who are the best performers in terms of supplies, in terms of vendor management, in terms of vendor performance. So this is a sort of clustering algorithm where you can know who are the high performers, who are the medium performers, who are the low performers, right? The other way is that if you want to sell a product, you want to know who your actual good customers are. So you can also do a clustering method based on the behavior data of the consumers, right? Right, you want to know who are all the high earners and the high spenders. So like that you can build your own clusters and form, and you can find out who are the best customers that you can procure to for your product, right? So we can also talk about some of the regression methodologies, a combination of regression and segmentation methodologies, wherein you want to find out whether your truck, whether it has been overloaded or not, right? So you will arrive at a parameter or a value or a weight using a regression methodology to find out which is the overweight. And then once a particular truck has been beyond the particular continuous value, you segment them into an overweight category. So this helps a lot of way to understand the performance of a vehicle under the overloaded circumstances or an underloaded circumstances. So this is all the other ways. The other way is that if you want to build a smart factory, you can use computer vision, wherein you can track the vehicles which are coming inside and outside your plant or your organization to have a automated solution wherein you can track the vehicle anywhere inside your own factory and find out which path it is going, and probably you can use that same methodology to optimize it, right? So you can use leverage on the artificial intelligence and the neural networks to arrive at the path which is the optimum, and also you can have an automated solution and also record the license plates of the vehicles which are coming in and out, right? And this is one of the use cases where you can leverage on the artificial intelligence and neural networks. And adding to what Bobby was also saying, probably I can build a chat bot which has the answers to all the questions regarding to a particular department. So I can have a HR department wherein they have a structured kind of a question. So I don't know what is my leave policy looks like. So in that concept, I can also build something similar policy, similar kind of a product for a supply chain management or a logistics. So I'm a very senior person in the management. I want to know what is the current stock for a particular product. So if I type that as a question, the chatbot should have the relevant information already collected and just give that as a response. So this is using your NLP technologies, right? So these are the different ways where you can leverage on your data analytics stuff, right from the basics also, right from your regression, clustering, or segmentation methodology. These are all the machine learning technologies. You can also move to the higher end versions of your artificial intelligence, like your NLP, computer vision, reinforcement learnings, all these things. You can also design your own bot. There are multiple use cases which not only pertains to your supply chain management, but also in general to your own perspective, you can build a lot. So the sky is the limit. So this is one perspective where I want to bring to everyone.
Thank you, Bragadeesh. Let me change gears little and go to Shamindra. So Shamindra, we are in the middle of a pandemic here right now, and I'm sure the impacts are huge. On the supply chain management as well. So could you sort of help us understand first of all how has COVID sort of impacted, and then how are we going to sort of manage and how the future looks like?
Yeah. So first of all, I think both Bobby and Bragadeesh laid out quite a few use cases. I just, in the context of the pandemic, I just want to pick up one thread from what Bobby mentioned in terms of sustainability, right? One big shift that has happened is if you see even the tier one companies that we typically look as examples of the best supply chains, they have historically always been designed for service level and cost. What this pandemic has fairly shaken up many of these companies that they have realized that they have not been designing their supply chain for risk and resiliency. That is a big shift, and that was a thread I heard Bobby pick up that thread and just wanted to re-emphasize that thread. Now, coming back in the question in terms of what you asked, right? Broadly, whenever we look and analyze companies and in terms of the activities that people do in the entire supply chain paradigm, right? You can broadly segregate the entire set of activities into three broad buckets. The first bucket is essentially repetitive jobs. These are things that people keep doing multiple times. There are reports, there are basic planning templates. You are pulling a data from this system, you're pushing it into planning system. Unfortunately, what we have seen even in the best of companies, typically supply chain professionals end up spending almost 70% of their time in this bucket, where it is repetitive jobs. One big shift, and you would have been reading this in the newspapers and things like that, is this entire bucket, which is repetitive, is going for hyper automation. And that's a fact. That's not now. That's already started when we were in the pandemic. Even simple things, you would have heard a lot of companies have gone for things that even was possible earlier, but companies didn't embark on it. Simple example being a POD digitization. So essentially, a truck essentially goes, sends the material somewhere, the POD is delivered, the documents keeps floating as a document because obviously the truck doesn't come at its point of origination. So by the time that document is actually received physically by the organization, the payment is done. The average cycle time in India historically has been 45 days and plus. In many cases, it's more than 60 days. Suddenly, you have all companies going for digitization of proof of delivery. And this is cutting across companies. And I am just picking up one simple example where technology always existed. This is the most basic example that I'm talking about. So there is an hyper digitization happening in that first bucket. The second bucket I see is what essentially we say the science of supply chain. This is the bucket which is the core of today's discussion, which is essentially how do we do decision making? How do we do decision support systems, right? And I'll take very quick two examples here. One, for example, during the pandemic and now more so post it, a lot of discussion is happening in terms of cost takeout. Now, when you talk about cost takeout, I think the typical areas of supply chain have already exhausted its means, right? And people are looking at new areas. I'll give you a quick 2-minute example in the cement industry, and the same is now getting extended in agro and similar companies, is where you in the cement industry have raw materials like lime, you have coke, you essentially coal, etc., right? Now, all of this is put together in what is called the fuel mix for the clean. The interesting part, and in some way Bragadeesh also mentioned about it, you have a lot of variability in your RMs. It varies, and in case of products like lime, in case of products like coke and coal, this variation is even higher. Now, as an organization, you are already have an endpoint output of quality. You have an endpoint target of at what cost you want to produce, but your input is constantly fluctuating. It's also fluctuating across season, because when you buy a coal in wet season, you have higher humidity. Your calorific value in your clean drops down dramatically. Now, how do you keep optimizing your input parameters while keeping constant what is going to be my calorific value in my clean and what is going to be the quality of my clinkers? Becomes a very interesting area where a lot of cost takeouts are happening. And I'm just giving one real example out here, right? The same principles, and this is the beauty of data science, the same principles is now being applied across industries. For example, in agro product in tea blending, again, a classic example. Tea, every year, the variety of the leaves, the texture, the quality, the scent is not constant. But if Unilever, as an example, is actually selling a product, they have to guarantee that there is a certain standard and quality. Then how do you really control that input parameter in a manner where your output is always constant? And these are very interesting data science techniques being used by supply chain professionals. The second example I would take is in the new product area. And historically, this has been an absolute pain in the supply chain domain, because typically when you do time series, etc., either you decide to take a proxy. You essentially say, I had a new product, I have taken a proxy of this new product, and I'm going to essentially predict based on this. Most often it's hardly true. The second issue is, even if you have taken a proxy, in supply chain context, you have to forecast at a node SKU level, right? When you are talking about forecasting at a node SKU level, it's not necessarily your proxy is selling in the same nodes as you are trying to sell the new product, which means you have zero historical demand in those nodes. So this proxy method hence goes for a toss. Now, for many of the new areas that Bobby was mentioning in terms of techniques, one of the very interesting techniques and advancements in data science is how you build attention models. Now, you can today essentially create a vector using the product attributes instead of forecasting a product or a SKU itself. And what does it mean? It essentially means you are taking design parameters. For example, the flavor, the size, the pack, the product attributes. You are taking the merchandising attributes in terms of price points, the promotion, etc. You are taking competition attributes, like what's the competition activity happening for the product. And you are creating a vector based on attributes and not forecasting the product itself. What it means is this attribute is common across products in your portfolio, not only in terms of the overall spectrum, it is also common in many of the nodes that you are unable to forecast. There are multiple implications of these kind of techniques. A, obviously the forecasting. B, and this is some work that we have done in the fast retail space. Now, fast retail, this is a reality. What you have sold last season is not what you are going to sell this season, because the SKUs completely change. How do you forecast your demand? Because it is a completely new fashion. Then you go to material, you go to cuts, you go to design type, you go to fabric, and all those design attributes, and actually forecast it. When you are within the season, you are able to disaggregate what is pushing my sales up and what is pulling my sales down based on the factor impacts of those attributes, which means I am also using these inputs for minimizing my markdowns, because that's a big area in the retail space, right? The third, after the season has ended, I now have quantifiable insights of which of the attributes which I used to design this product has really worked and has not worked. And these are real examples I'm talking from our experience for certain beverages company. They knew certain flavor types just didn't work. It was pulling their sales down where it should have been higher than their average sales. And they actually decided to sunset certain flavors, right? So these are very new areas in the data science where companies are focusing. And the third bucket, and I'll quickly summarize with that, is like Bobby and Bragadeesh mentioned, Data science is just one part of it. How do you orchestrate it? And that third block has become equally important in post-pandemic, because we are just not talking about the insights generated from this data science, but how do you action what is coming out of that data science? So how do you orchestrate both within your organization and with your ecosystem partners is the big thing that's evolving in a post-COVID scenario. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Jha.
Thanks, Shamindra. I'm, all of a sudden cognizance of time. Although we have, 15 more minutes, but the Q&A round is still there. So maybe I'll go to Bobby for one question, and then maybe we can move to Q&A. So Bobby, building on what Shamindra was saying, I wanted to know your perspectives on how data science is sort of stepping up to the challenge of COVID-19, right? And what do you think the skills of the future in terms of supply chain, keeping supply chain management in the mind, will be?
Am I audible? Okay, cool. So, in terms of supply chain management and how data science is coping up, and the research is now into handling different sorts of data. It could be knowledge graphs, it could be prescriptive analytics that are built on knowledge graphs, or it could be like what Shamindra was saying, embeddings. We have word embeddings for natural language processing right now. Recent advance is object embeddings, which means you find a camera finds a product or a lorry or a truck. Now it is now embedded into one vector. That vector now will be keeping on, we trace it, track it, and find it out where the truck has been, which means without even knowing, without even putting any sensor on truck, we can still know just from video data where it has been, just like how police have been finding some missing truck between two different toll points to a level. And now when it is 10 years ago, Ashitosh, we were only talking about bagging, boosting techniques, decision trees, random forests. Now from there, the technology with the compute happening have moved on to neural networks, which for example, neural networks now is exactly the same as what is being called as deep learning. But why it has become famous, or the buzzword now, the deep learning has become the buzzword? The reason is we have compute resources. Now, recently, 8 to 10 years ago is when NVIDIA has come up with a compute technology where they use the gaming process called graphical processing units, GPUs, as we always have. You have a PC with a GPU, then it is a gaming PC. Okay, that consists of lots of compute cores, which can small power, but lots of them. You can add more number of additions and multiplications in parallel. That's precisely it, which means I have a one CPU which can run at 2.4 gigahertz, but I'm asking it to give only 2 plus 1 equals 3. But for that, I don't need to use a big CPU like that. And almost all the programs are sequential in nature. If I can parallelize the operation across lots of cores, then I can actually speed up the compute in the same machine. That's when it comes to neural networks, what's happening is the compute, the compute is an algebraic operation where some matrix is being multiplicated, and then a calculus operation, a differentiation has to be done to get what is called back propagation. And all this compute now is feasible to be done in stipulated time, even though the current cost of a GPU, a powerful GPU like V100 from NVIDIA would cost a few lakhs of rupees, but okay, that is still possible. And you don't need to buy them, for God's sake. We have cloud. You can use it for a couple of hours and that's all. $14 an hour with Amazon, AWS or sorts. Now, given this compute, now you can churn lots of data, big amounts of data. You don't need to stop your imagination at the point that I have a lot of data. What can I do with it? And that's why newer techniques are coming up where it involves higher number of computations, larger number of data points. For example, Google's BERT, an NLP language model for English or any language, it has about more than 15 languages as I know. It has large data models coming up based on compute that they have used to get every knowledge from a textbook in English, they have taken that and put that or incorporated that into English and some vectors. So now in supply chain, what happens now? We have to deal with data over the internet to find out what's happening, which means I have a AI assistant. That person reads the internet, follows the news, listens to the news that is coming live, and then notes down what's happening. For example, stock market. What happens to, I have a portfolio and I am going into futures and options. And I'm not talking just about supply chain here, but supply chain can affect a futures contract also, which means uh, a pandemic in India uh, could be forcing somebody who has bought a futures option in the US that some 5 quintals of cotton has to be transported, and suddenly Indian authorities say we cannot ship any flights to the US. It's a kind of a virtual pandemic for them. It's a stoppage. What happens then? Then the contract has to go away. So what that person has to do at that point, nobody knows. But given this, at this point when the news is being delivered, and if that manager, it cannot be held, or a manager or a human being cannot be held against for all such news, because nobody can follow all the news. So, and artificial intelligence agents are now put in place to read the news, which means to hear the news, understand voice, uh, text, video processing, and whatnot, you name it, and everything is now into Embedding. And now for in terms of where we should be learning is, we should have an open mind about what technologies are coming up. Every student, you, me, everyone is a student now, so we have to keep on learning to update ourselves on the knowledge what's happening. And specifically in supply chain and pandemic, as you were mentioning, or any obstruction, somehow the product manager, maybe the supply chain owner, could deal or ask or guide that AI towards, instead of offshoring it, just get it into your near shoring it or onshoring it, where you have, instead of having every part assembled to one warehouse, you have divided warehouses. Okay, can you guide the AI? After all, the product manager has to guide the AI to show that, okay, give me small amounts of 5 warehouses where I can have 5 products, even though for example, we take the case of what Shamindra was saying, the tea. We have 5 plantations, and each is giving different taste. Okay, and I cannot ensure at that point of time in a pandemic, I cannot ensure the same taste. Can I have 5 different tastes and 5 different places? It's okay, but at least the product runs. The manager or the AI leader has to take a role in terms of supply chain and AI, where it is going. It is still at that point where it cannot take the decisions on its own. For example, somebody in the question section was asking, okay, where else data analytics plays a key role in OCSM? Everywhere, everywhere. Just like how you build a model. We are driving a car. Now I have a model. I know the car. I know that because I'm very confident about how the engine throttles, and I can overtake a vehicle. That's my mental model. Okay, suddenly the car behaves differently. I cannot overtake that. My mental model fails. Exactly, that's happening when in case of any supply chain or any sorts, where the data doesn't follow a distribution, your model fails. So you have to keep on checking the data. Quick mathematical model is to be built, and that is only a prescriptive analytics, right? It's only giving you where in a scenario what happens, but still the decision as of now, no AI is taking a decision. It's still human beings who are taking a decision. AI is only an assistant. So that's where we can guide our students towards.
Sure. Thanks, Bobby. Thank you so much. I'm sure the students would have noted many of the points, very important points. We have a little over 10 minutes, so I think we can move to the Q&A round, and we can probably address a couple of questions. We have a hard stop at 4:30 because many of our colleagues have classes post that. But if there are more questions, we can definitely, we can get them through you. We can approach you and probably get the answers later on. So I think the first question is for Bragadeesh. Uh,
Yeah,
the question is, you having a rich experience in the finance industry and now in the automotive industry as head of analytics. So what can be the potential financial implications of harnessing emerging tech in supply chain management? It's quite a long question, but
There are, if you ask about any technology that you want to imbibe as a start, whether it is like blockchain or artificial intelligence or simple machine learning tools or big concepts like Hadoop clusters, etc., you need to invest some amount of money onto these technologies. But the basic questions arise that whether will I get the benefit after investing. So any project that I choose, irrespective of whether that is for supply chain management or anything, you would have learned in your finance classes is something called NPV of a particular project, right? So if that is in a positive cash flow, then I will invest. Else I will don't. So first thing I need to evaluate whether whatever I'm putting as an investment, will I get a return on it or not, right? So if this, whatever the project that you're doing passes this particular test, then I'll move on. So now to set up a kind of an infrastructure, now there are two ways to do that, whether I can do it on an on-prem or whether I can go it on a cloud. So it all depends on your use case. The use case can be that whether I want the result on a real-time basis or a batch processing, right? So it all depends on the use case, but yes, there are some financial implications to set up all this basic stuff for any use case that you do. But the point remains that whether will I get the right amount of what do you say, ROA on it or not, whether there's going to be a positive cash flow if I implement this or not. There should be a strong justification for the use case. If it is yes, then of course, then I proceed with that. I hope I answered the question.
absolutely, absolutely. There's another important question. I'd like to pose that to Shamindra. It says it talks about the potential challenges that can arise in the adoption of big data analytics in supply chain. I think that's an important area to touch upon.
Yeah, and I will probably request Bobby to add after me, because honestly, this is his favorite area. So I will request you to chip in, Bobby, once I complete. But just to lay out a little bit, and probably we did not cover that, and Bobby did mention some of the connotation like knowledge graphs, etc. If we just before I answer the question, it's important to understand what's the hierarchy of getting this done, right? Now, you have a diverse set of source systems. Traditionally, it has been the ERPs of the world. Then you had the planning tools which came in late 90s and 2000s, right? The APOs, I2s that Mayur talked about. And now, obviously, you have the next generation cloud platforms that have come into play. And then you have the other signals that are coming. And that's where the classification of big data is coming, because you have essentially input streaming in terms of the locations that both Bragadeesh and Bobby talked about. It is the machine asset state that is streaming, etc. Right? So you have this whole array of source system. Then this has to be, and one big problem in supply chain, and why that note that I referred, the HBR article, and why that has not been real after 3 years now, the big challenge always has been all of these are from unique system, and they have to reside in some homogeneous architecture where in a data scientist's job starts. For example, the knowledge graph that Bobby was alluding to, right? You have to bring all this data into some knowledge graph where all these nodes, the components, they have to be logically mapped and residing in a common data architecture. Because where the data scientist really starts is after the data engineer has done this job. And on top of this knowledge architecture, you have essentially what we today call intelligent workflows and algorithms. Whether you are talking about AI-driven demand sensing, or you are talking about dynamic replenishment model, you are talking about dynamic inventory model, you are talking about scheduling algorithms, etc., all sits as intelligent workflows on top of this data architecture. And then you have the experience layer, because, for example, as managers, all of you, if you see some of the SAP screens of the past era, none of you will use it, right? Because you are all used to using the Netflixes and the Ubers and Olas of the world. You will use an application which really gives you that kind of an experience. Now, while we discuss a lot about algorithms, the complexity of algorithms, the workflow, the big challenge always has been to create that knowledge graph. And I think for the first time in the last at least 2 years now, I am seeing real progress in supply chain in trying to really move towards that. So the question was how difficult it is. It is very difficult. As a matter of fact, having seen this in action for last 15 years, I think that's where many of the projects fail. It actually doesn't fail at an algorithm level, because data scientists always cracks algorithms. It fails in the data layer, because when you have this multiplicity of the data at different speeds, at different context, different nature, unless you have that consistent data architecture, it becomes a very difficult proposition to solve. Bobby, would you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Shamindra. It finally, our person who is questioning maybe at the point, is it because of the infrastructure? No, the reason is the barriers to entry are very less with cloud. Okay. Second one, is it the number of algorithms and knowledge of the algorithms? No, because you can find, and within 2 days you can recruit anybody, virtually anybody. Okay, some kind of algorithm can be put into place. Most of these clouds will, AWS, Azure, GCP will give all algorithms whatever you want. And the third one is the whole important point. The fuel of all this is the data, the electricity, as now we are calling it from the past few years. The reason it fails in the data and the correctness of data, uh, the aptness of that data to the application, and that's where the whole catch is, and that is where the management students are poised to guide. For example, if I am an architect in data science, I can deliver them the algorithm at once, and it gives them some output. Always a machine learning thing gives an output, and is that useful or not? How is that useful? Then my job is done at the point where, okay, you gave this data, with this data I have made this. You gave me this flour, I'll make this chapati. That's all. Chapati is there. Is that tasty or not? No, I don't know. Okay, that's not my job. So as a manager, as a leader, as a future leader, as a product leader, the management student, for example, all our audience are supposed to see the vision, where I should get the data from, what kind of data is needed, and what that data should deliver. And after these three things, then I can call in or pull in an architect or a data scientist to tell, okay, build something on this. I think if I see this, I, as a human being, I can understand that there is enough information hiding inside this paragraph of data. You try to get this to a machine so that it can automate things that machine learning can do. But if the data doesn't have anything, any useless thing, okay, for example, Bobby Chaitanya is eating food, and you want to say, will Biden win or not? It doesn't it doesn't suffice anything. So as a product leader, you guys have to understand that the data, which is the fuel for all these models, has to be correct. As a support, I second your thought, Shamindra, that data is where the mistakes happen most times, along with other places also. Using random forest where it is not required, using even for example, as I always tell my audience, in general, if a model is if the data itself is containing 100 SS, okay, 99.9 SS and zero point 0.01 no's, and if I have to build a classifier on that data, what I would do, I will not build another classification algorithm. I will just say always yes, because 99.9% of the time my algorithm is correct, because the data contains all that. So you are using a different classification model. You should not be using that. You should be using something called outlier detection. Build an outlier detector, do it. So which means that is a data scientist job. So as a product leader, please uh, ask the data scientist to validate the data. Is it applicable? Ask them to give you a presentation on why is the data not applicable. They will tell the reasons. That is their job. Don't dwell into it. Your leaders, your product leaders. Then your job is to find, okay, another set of data for this application, not or another application for this data. Either ways, okay, you can lead them, but do not these are all the predicaments. Some lack of understanding, lot of data, and using bad model to another thing, or even the application is quite futuristic. For example, something that can happen like transcending from here to there in person. Okay, that is coming up as virtual reality, but we are not at there. And if you are envisioning a product of that level using AI, and building your business model on that, maybe that's also another one where we see failures. So
Absolutely. There are several questions lined up, but in the interest of time, I'll have to forego them and probably get it across all of you to, if you would like to answer them later on. So I'll have to move to the end of it. It has been a wonderful discussion. Once again, thank you so much for joining. Maybe I'll request a minute of closing remark from each of you, and then probably I can hand it over to Agrima and team to sort of take it forward. So Bragadeesh, can we begin with you?
Yeah, so thank you, students. Thank you, Dr. Jha. Thank you, Dr. Lijo, and all the students who are gathered, and the panelists, Shamindra and Bobby. This has been an enriching experience for me, and I hope that you had some valuable lessons in the talk and the session that has been given by all of us. Please do connect with me on the LinkedIn if you have any sort of question that needs to be answered. I'm always available. Please feel free to connect, no formalities, right? I'll be looking forward to interact with you again if such opportunities come. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Bragadeesh. Shamindra.
So my quick two words to close the session is, as management professionals, I'll really encourage you all to take up some skills in data science. If I look at my own background, I am not a tech person. I come from business. My entire life has been in business consulting. But the reality of today's world is, if you don't have basic skills in data science, even in that profession, you can't survive. Even whether you are a functional manager or you are in business consulting, if you don't have basic data skills, it is very difficult to survive in the future world. You don't need to be a data scientist, but please don't be afraid of picking up those skills. Thanks.
Thank you, Shamindra. Bobby.
first of all, a note of thanks to you, Professor Ashitosh, Professor Lijo, Alice, Shikhar, Agrima, and that's a difficult name to pronounce, Agrima. I thought it was Arima initially, but sorry for that. Agrima. It was very well conducted session. You guys have been diligent, and you just were even checking if the link has come or not to a level that's very good. It's a cool way you conducted all of this stuff. And to the audience, if at all, I don't think they are at this level will be afraid. If at all you guys are afraid about any sort of AI, okay, just please understand that people who are actually doing AI are equally afraid, because what they learned yesterday is useless tomorrow. after all the years of hard work, just like how Shamindra is saying, you guys are the Uber generations. Most of you may not have even seen a telephone that had a ringer, maybe in museums, of course. That's equivalent to that. Some of these models may not be useful, but when they are teaching you arimas, or when they are teaching you decision trees, please understand that these are the building blocks on how the intuition has been built. If you miss the intuition when you are learning, I think the somewhere I see the product leader in you don't come. You please learn with all diligence and why this was invented, which means why arima is solving a problem. Maybe that's the workshop you are going to have in the evening. Why is that solving a particular time series problem, and what exactly is the problem? Please, when you are thinking about the data, don't focus just on what is arima. Okay, how is arima dealing with this data, and if I have to be the product leader, what would I do? Which means, what is the question, what is the required answer? Please focus on these two things first before you even check the data. That's a request and an appeal to all of you that will ease your life and gain you more confidence.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bobby. Thanks again to all the panelists. And thank you, Professor Lijo.
Thank you all the panelists for such a wonderful and insightful discussion. So thank you again for taking time and being a part of this event, as well as talking to our students, taking up their questions. It's great meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Agrima, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll pass it on to Alice for the next remarks.
Thank you so much, panelists, for the insightful panel discussion and for answering all the questions in so much detail. The discussion on the use of big data will certainly help us in taking decisions related to supply chain management as future managers. With this, we come to the end of our first event for the day. Next up, we have a 20-minute quiz on a D2C platform at 5 p.m. with a 30-minute window till 5:30 p.m. Towards the end of the conclave, we have a workshop on demand forecasting using R by the Director of Planning, Johnson & Johnson, Mr. Murugan, at sharp 6 p.m. We hope to see all of you there. This event would not have been possible without the constant support and guidance of a lot of people, and only to name a few. Firstly, I would like to thank all the guests, Mr. Mayur, Mr. Bragadeesh, Mr. Shamindra, and Dr. Bobby, for taking their time out of their busy schedules and being with us here today. Also, to our moderators, Professor Ashutosh and Dr. Lijo, for driving the panel discussion. As a token of appreciation, we would like to donate a small amount on behalf of the panelists and our keynote speaker to Abhyudaya. Abhyudaya is a social initiative of Bhavan's SPJIMR for the children of urban poor families of Mumbai.
On behalf of the IM and OSCM committees, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Ranjan Banerjee and the program leadership team for their constant support. We would also like to thank the ADMAP head, Dr. Anupama Gupta, and the IM and OSCM committee heads, Professor Debmalia, Professor Shekhar, Professor Ashutosh, and Dr. Lijo, for their constant guidance. We're also thankful to our area faculty from the areas of information management and operations and supply chain management for joining us today. We are very thankful to Vinita ma'am and the central communications team, and also to Deepa ma'am and the Abhyudaya team for their continuous support. We express our heartfelt appreciation to Ms. Kavita Shetty and the IT team of the Institute for their unending support. And last but not the least, to each one of you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you, and we hope you had an enriching experience.